Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall, the New Bedford Cable Network. Joining us today, I like the rotation and it works pretty well. Chris Markey, State Representative, joining us. Thanks for coming in again.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's the M month, I guess, for Markey, right?
The M month, yeah. And it actually works out because Representative Schmidt gets December this year, so it's his last month in office, and we get
his last hurrah.
Last hurrah, so we'll get him one last time on the hot seat, if you will. Lots going on up there for you guys right now. There's still legislation that needs to be dealt with, and as the session comes to an end, and really the session is coming to an end. You got 1 month to go. Overall, how do you think right now it's been going?
There's moments of frustration with it. I think the idea that we're still in session, and we're going to go back formally to resolve some issues that we haven't, because traditionally during the even years, we stop on July 31st. Yeah. There are some outstanding bills that are of significance that we hope we can resolve before the new session begins in January. But overall, I think what you have to look at is how we've done in creating jobs, creating investments, creating opportunities for people since the pandemic. And I think that was our goal at this point, was to make sure that we didn't have a recession in Massachusetts, that we didn't have high unemployment, and that when you look at where we are, relatively speaking, the inflation is down, the unemployment is down. There's obviously higher prices, but that's, I think, a reflection of coming out of the pandemic, where there were supply chain issues, and I think those will start to come back down. That's part of where we stood in really at the January of 2022, and when we've come back from that, I think it's pretty good the way we've handled it. We have dealt with a lot of issues. And I think we've done it in a compassionate way. We've done it in a conservative, fiscally way. And I think we can do better at it. But I do feel optimistic that we handled this situation uniquely well.
Do you find that, because you've been there for a while now, do you find that the issues are being addressed, or, I'm generalizing now, because as you said, there's still some things that have to be dealt with this session, but do you find that for the most part the issues that you want to hear or that need to be discussed are getting discussed and getting dealt with, or is it still, we're just, are there certain things that just the legislature's not doing that needs to be done?
Well, I think the speed of the way we do things can be troubling to people, but we're trying to be methodical, and we're trying to see how things go. If you recall, we didn't even pass our budget during 2020 until November of 2021 fiscal year, till November. And that's because we were in the middle of the pandemic. We wanted to see how things were going. And we were going month to month, paying our bills, doing what we had to do, investing where we could. And I think sometimes moving slowly allows us to see how there's a reaction. I'm a moderate Democrat, right? I look at things as there needs to be consistency before people will invest money, and before people will decide, hey, I want to try this out. That's the nature of us. We're not really huge risk takers. And I think the legislature has done a very good job of doing that, stepping forward with small steps along the way, whether it be housing, whether it be offshore wind, whether it be the tax credits for pharmaceutical companies and other biotech companies. Those are things that we do progressively in a fashion that may not appease the progressives, and it may be too fast for the conservatives, but if we stay steady, I think it makes a difference.
One of the things that you and I were talking about off camera that you need to address is that economic development bill. It's been discussed and what have you. What's your sense? Because I know that when I was talking to Rep. Hendricks last month, that there's stuff in there for New Bedford that benefits the city. What is your hope with that legislation?
I would, if I was a betting man, I would bet that we pass it. There's too much investment in that to ignore it, and there's too many different reps who have a stake in it. So every rep has something in that bill that will help their community. So there's a very strong interest in doing it. I personally think that it's more of a tool to get the other bills resolved and have that as the final bill to make sure that everything else is in line, whether it be the environment bill, whether it be the housing bill, the medical healthcare bill. Those things will all want to be in line, and then economic development will take its place.
We talked about housing last time you were on, because I watched the show too. Has the legislature, and I don't know how much really the legislature can do when it comes to housing, but there is so much question about housing. Where do we stand? Where do you think right now we can go with housing? I mean, there's only so much money.
There is. The only thing you can really do is provide investments to people to invest in housing. I've said to you before, and I've said and preached it, is the biggest thing that we can do is create home ownership. And I think the biggest obstacle to people getting out of rental property into home ownership is the down payment. And I think the government should assist in any way they can to people who have shown a fiscal responsibility and, you know, paying their rent every month, doing what they have to do, try to do a savings every month. They're not going to Aruba and Cancun and to Europe every year and spending $30,000 on trips. They're trying to invest whatever they can towards bettering themselves and investing in a home. Those are the people that I want to see make sure we provide an opportunity with down payment assistance, because once they get out of a rental property, they're in a home. When they're in a home, they have equity. It's a savings account. Essentially, a home is a savings account for people. And then that opens up more rental properties. And what does that do? When the supply goes up, the demand will go down, and the prices will go down on rental properties. And then that cycle can continue, where you start off renting a property, you go into a small home as a first-time home buyer, you create equity, you save money, you then move up to another house. That's kind of the American dream, not just jump in and grab a McMansion. That's what we want to be able to do, is try to make it affordable for people to do that. I think a down payment assistance program, which I've been saying for about 5 years now, is the #1 factor we could do. Secondly is creating opportunities for people to bring in their parents into their homes.
The in-laws.
I think the new term is sandwich generation, right? They're taking care of their parents and they're also taking care of their kids. And, you know, having now ADUs, I think they're called, accessory dwelling units.
Right.
Where you could build on without zoning violations and do that as of right with certain types of property where you have at least 10,000 square feet, you have certain other requirements that doesn't take up X number of square footage. Those are things that I think will happen. Why? Because again, like in my district of Ward 1 of New Bedford, there's lots of single family ranches where people have lived there for the last 50 years. And they're older, they're having a tougher time maintaining the place. But if they could sell their property and move into a place which is, you know, it's basically an in-law apartment in a Dartmouth or in a Acushnet or Freetown or wherever, that's going to open up properties in New Bedford as well. And if you figure that out, if it's 100 houses that are sold because we have a program for that, that's 100 people buying a house who are moving out of rental properties. And then you can start to develop a little bit more. The other thing is zoning. We're trying to create, that's why we do the ADUs. Some towns won't allow that before we doing the housing bill, and that's part of the housing bill. Like I've said before, you go to Rehoboth, you need 250 feet of frontage on your street before you can build a house. Basically, you need 2 to 3 acres to build in Rehoboth. That keeps a lot of people out.
Yeah.
And it limits it to very rich people who can live there. And that's a problem for places like Swansea or Somerset or even Fall River or New Bedford, that they can't expand out into the more rural areas.
Are you seeing, and I asked you this off camera, but I think it's important to know, do you see a housing demand? You represent all of Dartmouth. Is there a housing crunch in Dartmouth? You always hear it in New Bedford, that there's not really much room to expand. Do you hear about a housing crunch in Dartmouth as well?
Yeah, well, the prices indicate that, right? The prices in Dartmouth are extraordinary.
And they're not, and no place is going down.
And that's partly because the supply is not there, right? And what the issue between the balance in New Bedford is not enough space, right? We just don't have enough space. And the other side of it is where can New Bedford create a tax base where it's more industry and commercial, because that's going to help the tax base more so the residents aren't paying more. So you want to create more commercial space in New Bedford than you would residential, and try to get some of those really high taxes in New Bedford lower. In Dartmouth, our balance is trying to preserve a lot of the land for farming, for conservation, and other things, and that's the balance that we have, because farming is a huge part of the economy in Dartmouth. There's lots of farms, and surprisingly, if you drive through, you wouldn't realize how many there are, but there's tons of farms in Dartmouth, and you want to preserve that. So how do you balance that out? And there is a need to have more housing, and again, the zoning requirements of Dartmouth probably need to be changed to allow more of those opportunities and find developments where you can do that. I don't necessarily think we always hear this negative connotation of affordable housing or 40B. I think that trying to find ways in which we can incentivize people to build in our community at a reasonable rate in a more condensed area is the more beneficial thing for Dartmouth. And we need to do that. In New Bedford, the same way. Converting over some of the properties that are abandoned and doing that, and I think the city is trying to do that as best they can. That's an important part of creating a housing stock. But ultimately, it comes back to home ownership. Home ownership is the way in which the middle class thrives. That's it. I mean, you look at how we did in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. The middle class strived or did so well because of the fact that they had home ownership. They had something to pass on to the next generation. And if you pay off your mortgage and be patient and do that, that's a good chunk of change to pass on to the next generation. So that's the idea of building a middle class. It's not just creating better, increasing minimum wage, which that doesn't do anything for the middle class. You really we need to create a middle class, and you do it through home ownership.
Yeah, and I think the one thing you're talking about too is just the space level. There's just only so much space, and the prices haven't gone down anywhere. Prices keep going up everywhere. And it's not a New Bedford problem or a Dartmouth problem. It's a everywhere problem, which is, I think I've read it's like the longest streak of housing price increases in ever, really.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go down. The only thing I'd say is that the tax base, or the taxes in New Bedford are much higher than they are in Dartmouth. And there's a variety of reasons for that.
I was just going to say, but in some ways too, and I'm not disagreeing, I'm a homeowner in New Bedford, but you're comparing apples and oranges when you compare it to a town too, right? Because there's more in the city. Yeah,
well, there's more to, you got more police, more fire, all of those things. But part of the equation for that is figuring out that balance. How do we create a tax base that's higher, right? We need to develop more profitable properties, keeping properties in the private sector. Right. Is number one. Like, that's the biggest thing. You go up and down New Bedford and downtown New Bedford, there's tons of nonprofits in New Bedford downtown area, which you would think would be the highest commercial area and the highest rates. And those nonprofits aren't paying property taxes. Now, they do good work for, the area and all of that. I get all that. But the burden falls on the taxpayer, either residents or small commercial businesses. So that's why you got to find a balance, and a focus on that, I think, is really important for places like New Bedford or Fall River, these gateway cities. And the same thing with Dartmouth. Dartmouth has a blessing of having that Route 6 go through it in that big commercial area. That's a significant part of the tax base. And also they have a Fons Corner Road, which is again developed through a lot of medical buildings and office buildings. So that's a good tax base for a town the size we are, in the diversity we have in our geography, right? We have farmlands, we have real rural areas, and we also have suburban area type things, and then we have a big commercial area. That balance is really important.
Yeah, and Fairhaven kind of has it too when you think about it, Route 6.
And Wareham has seen the light, and that's why I got that Wareham crossing and all of that. And if you look up Route 195, it's like every 10 or 15 miles you see that. You see it in Wareham, Fairhaven, Dartmouth, you go to Swansea, Seekonk, like all of that, all that development along that 195 corridor.
Well, you were talking about that, which I think is fascinating too, that there is a chance, you know, with New Bedford, businesses to expand. There are businesses that want to expand. There's opportunities out there. It's just seizing those opportunities.
Well, the Whaling City Golf Course Industrial Park that they're trying to develop and do that, I think that you need to know who you are before you can develop something like that. We are not Silicon Valley, and we're not, you know, Waltham, where there's biotech and computer software stuff. We don't have the education infrastructure for that down in our area. We do have hardworking people who can manufacture and do things, and I see things that, like Titleist, whether they want to expand or not, I don't know. But that's an opportunity. That bigger companies like that, Sid Wainer, another company that's big that could do that. Some of the seafood processing plants, they're seeing opportunities that could be out in the industrial park as well. So there's lots of opportunities within what we have now, but there's also going to be opportunities for companies to come in because of the less expensive property values we have down here, rather than developing in, say, Needham or Newton or Wellesley, or they can come down here and develop and have the same type of workforce that we have here that can satisfy that.
I want to imagine too that because of New Bedford's infrastructure, you've got a port, you've got an airport, you've got commuter rails coming down, but they've always, you know, you've got rail. That makes it attractive as well, where other places might not have all three of those or those options.
Yeah, well, the port is the biggest thing. That makes us unique. There's only 4 deep water ports in Massachusetts that's recognized as the deep water ports that are really protected and have a certain protection that it needs to utilize that. It's Boston, Salem, New Bedford, and Brayton Point, Fall River area. That's it. And that's why you see, that's why preserving the state pier to have the cargo and to do those things is really important, because there are so few opportunities. And if, again, we have a crisis of a significant nature, like a pandemic or a war or whatever, we could use those resources for industrial purposes. And the cargo is a really important part of New Bedford. And clearly the kind of the gift I see that Governor Patrick did back in 2008 when he decided that he wanted to, or 9, when he wanted to build the offshore wind terminal and saw the light of that. That idea, that investment was huge to New Bedford. You go down there now, it's impressive to see the number of workers there. It's impressive to see that our education institutions have designed special classes in building infrastructure for that sole purpose. It's glad to see that the offshore wind also cleaned up the Eversource site on the waterfront, and Foss has taken that over. Those are all parts that happened because of that single investment that Governor Patrick did way back about offshore wind and trying to get offshore wind here. So you look along the waterfront, it's changing a little bit, but I think it's to the benefit for the future.
And it's, yeah, I mean, it's still the most valuable fishing port in the world.
It is, really. And I don't want to lose that for sure.
Where, you brought up State Pier, I'm curious, where is that State Pier process right now? I know that we had the public hearings.
So they're processing the RFPs that went into it and balancing out, I think, mass development, at least my hope is, because I've been trying to advocate for that, is a balance between the commercial area, retail area, and the industrial type stuff.
It seems everybody wants some sort of combination of that.
Yeah, you can't have all the pieces that everybody offered, right? You can't have a park that the little cruise company wanted. You can't have necessarily the the auction that they want, and you can't, all of those things together at the same time. They take up the same spots. You want to balance it out. You want to make sure that things are protected. The people of Cuddy Hunk are desperate in need to make sure that there's a spot on the pier for the alert to come back and forth.
That's really their lifeline when you think about it.
I think a restaurant in the front of the building, right on MacArthur Boulevard, on the front part of the pier, would be a fantastic thing. It's, you know, and then there'd be retail stores for people. Again, New Bedford is not a destination for people to come for vacation. It's a place for people to pass through, spend a few hours, and go on to something else. Whether they stop here for a few hours and they go to the Cape, whether they stop here for a few hours and then jump on a ferry and go to the Vineyard, whether they're historian types and want to see the National Park with the Whaling Museum and the cobblestones and live that up for a day or two. That's about the extent of who we are. So I think having that retail area, the restaurants down there, people will want to come to New Bedford to go sit on a pier, look out at the water, and eat their meal. That's who we are. And I think Steve Silverstein has done a good job of a proposal there. I think that, again, preserving the cargo area and the refrigeration is important. Continuing to have the ferry access, which brings in, I think, tons of money in tourists to New Bedford.
Especially, and it's year-round now.
It is. but the real thing is, if you go from Memorial Day to Labor Day, it's amazing. Or Columbus Day weekend, the parking lots are full.
Yeah, and I know one of the things, too, that I know the mayor's talked about, you need more parking down there, too.
Yeah, well, that's a big thing. I know the proposal for the city with the Foss pier is to have a parking garage down there.
Yeah.
And that would be great. I mean, ideally it would be nice to be a little bit closer to the center of the city, but I think it'll be a good opportunity for them.
Got a couple of things left, a couple minutes left here, but I just want to touch base just district-wide for you. What are you focused on right now as you end the session? And you know, obviously the election's coming up, but unopposed, and hopefully it looks good that you'll be in for another 2 years.
Well, unless someone writes in, at least I got one vote for me. Actually, probably my kids voted for me.
Well, you never know. Did you give them enough money this month or something, you know? But
they do all right.
Do you have anything right now that you want to, that's on top of your list of things that you really got to tackle?
Well, I think the big thing is the economic development bill, to make sure that passes. That's an important part of our area, to make sure that happens.
You only got 2 months to go, though. I mean, there's not much time.
Oh, there's plenty of time. It's all in the powers to be that just, you know, can control that.
Are they still working on those legislations?
Yeah.
The House and Senate committees?
Yes. Yeah. It's just the conference committees.
Right, the conference committee, yeah.
So that's kind of where I see things. And then I'm trying to help out on some of the local things, how to utilize the old police station in Dartmouth, and what's the best way to do that, and trying to assist different people doing that. Also, trying to help with the farmers. I think that there is a realization after COVID that trying to buy local is really important, and trying to buy, you know, local produce and smaller businesses is really a good way to keep our economy going in a local way. So I'm seeing that happen now more. If you go down Bakerville Road just after the high school in Dartmouth, it's almost like a little supermarket down there where they have a farm stand. They got a big tent that's up there all the time.
And you see farmers facing a lot of challenges.
They do. They have deer. I mean, that was one of the things I filed, is to have a commission on the deer, because we have to deplete the population. They suggest that you should have about 12 deer per square mile. Down in this area of southeastern Mass, it's about 60 to 70. And it causes the farmers real problems, but it also causes people who are driving cars problems. I mean, there's more cars being or hitting deer than any time before. And we need to figure out a way to deplete that population with still being humane. But again, that's a problem for places like Dartmouth, where the expansion of suburban areas are going into more rural areas. And, you know, that's, I guess, a first world problem more than anything.
How are you, because I know you worked and we've talked about past education reform and the legislature certainly tackled that. How do you stand right now, not you, but how does that aid stand right now when you talk about education, funding? I know, like I said, you changed the formula so that it equaled out.
Well,
but
I think the formula is based upon everyone taking on some responsibility. When Dartmouth is super low tax rate, like we're like 39th lowest, I think, for the tax rate, which is great for the community, but maybe we need to make more of an investment in our education in that. So that might become a local problem, and not that I want to raise taxes,
yeah,
but it's something to start to look at to say maybe instead of being 39th, maybe we could be 100th. We could still be in the bottom third of Massachusetts towns. But what that would do is that would increase the funding as well, because the formula is so complicated, but part of it is who's taking on the responsibility to do that. And the higher tax rate places are getting a little bit more money.
and you were pleased with that too. You like
yeah.
New Bedford got more money, and
New Bedford, but New Bedford needs more,
right?
Because of the many different complex circumstances of many of the individuals. But as I come back to education, education is you don't have to be a smart parent. You don't have to be smarter than your kid school-wise. You just have to value it, and you have to make sure you value it for your kid. It's going to make your kid's life so much better if you value the education and you are able to provide them the opportunities that you may not have had. And that's what I would instill in the citizens of New Bedford, is make sure your kid gets the best education possible. And if you don't feel comfortable doing their homework, find something helping them because you don't know it and you feel embarrassed. Don't be. Find ways in which you can do that, but you have to value your kid's education. That should be your #1 priority as a parent.
Any opinion on the MCAS question on the ballot for November? Getting rid of it as a graduation requirement?
I have no idea. I think that's the closest one of the ballot questions that'll go down.
And I think back for myself, I mean, we didn't have an MCAS test for graduation requirement.
No, but times
but again, right, times have changed.
And funding relies on things like that and having standardized testing. And I personally think that I do think that a test is required, but I also think that one of the things you should look to is improvement. Because you should see, if there's a kid who does not do well in 3rd and 5th grades, 7th grade, you know, you then say, have they improved to a degree where maybe they're going to develop their intellect more so when they're 19 or 20 and grow that way? Or are they of the character that they're going to improve through life? And that would be a great alternative for kids who don't pass, is, okay, have you improved? If you haven't improved and you've stayed down and you don't care to try to get better, then it's a different story. But I do think that it's a great incentive for everybody, from teachers to administrators to students to parents, to motivate their children. You need to have some goal to get there, and there should be expectations of that.
We've got to leave it there. Got a lot on the table today.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thanks for taking me off schedule.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you again soon.